Good morning. My name is Joe and I'm with Terco. Today we are going to be going through step-by-step procedures of how to replace the crimp down end of stroke inner pilot. This inner pilot is located in this area, which is the upper part of the crimper assembly. To do so, we're going to start with removing all the hoses off of the left side of the crimper. There would be 6 5/32 size hoses that are going to be removed from each port. We're then going to remove the crimper head, dismounting it off of the main shaft. Next, we will remove the wedge, which is installed inside the head on the bottom of the mandrel shaft. Once we have the head apart and off and the hoses disconnected, we can loosen up 4 bolts that are on the top using a 5/16 Allen wrench, removing this top cap. Once we remove the top cap, the cylinder, which is this gray area, and the crimper piston, along with this collar and the mandrel shaft, will be easily lifted up and out of the way. Once we get that off, we will remove 4 screws, 2 in the front and 2 in the rear, loosening up this guard assembly. We will then unscrew the bottom plate from the main shaft. Now the bottom plate has another plate mounted to it, which is underneath this guard, which you will see as we get further into the disassembly. Once we have this bottom plate removed from the main shaft, we will then separate this bottom plate and the plate attached to it with 4 more screws. Once it is detached from the bottom plate, we will be left with only this plate, which is where the inner pilot is installed. Before we begin the disassembly, let's take a look at the tools that we're going to need to disassemble the top end of the crimper. We're going to use a 3/16 Allen wrench. We're going to use a 1/8 Allen wrench. We're going to use a 1/2 inch open end. We're going to use a spanner wrench. And we're going to use a 5/16 Allen head wrench. This particular one is attached to a ratchet, but any standard 5/16 Allen wrench is suitable for the job. The first thing we're going to do is turn off all of the air to the machine. Once all of the air is off to the machine, we're going to disconnect the 6 hoses mounted on the left-hand side. These are the 6 5/32 inch size hoses. Be sure you have the hoses numbered so that you know exactly where they will go when you have to put the hoses back on. Now with those hoses out of the way, we're now going to scroll down to the head, because there is a hose that goes into the side of the housing and you have the vacuum hose, which is the 1/2 inch line. You're going to disconnect both of those from the crimp head. Next, we're going to loosen up the set screw, which locks the head assembly onto the main shaft. Now, the set screw is located above the adjusting collar. Now, to get to it, you may need to unscrew the adjusting collar so that you can visually see the hole where the Allen wrench has to be screwed into. So we're going to unscrew the adjusting collar. As you can see, the lower bell housing is also turning. That's fine. Here you can see the hole where the set screw is. And you're going to stick a wrench in there to unscrew it. Before you unscrew the head off of the main shaft, you may need to dismount the gassing valve and the reclaim valve. They are both mounted in the side of the bell housing. Now, I know that you have taken these off many times before, so you would do this the same way. Another way you could do it without having to remove the two valves is you could simply unscrew the bell nut, remove the head, the lower, the bell housing, and just put it off to the side. And now you're left with the upper portion of the crimp head. This may be the easier way to do it. Now you're going to take your spanner wrench and you're going to find the hole for the spanner wrench to fit into. You may need to unscrew the adjusting collar a bit more. And once you find the hole, you're going to loosen up the head, and then it should just spin off. I know you've taken the head off many times before, and up to this point there's no different. Once it comes off, you're just going to take the head assembly and you're going to put it off to the side. Next, you're going to remove the wedge. And you remove the wedge, and when the wedge comes off, a bearing, bushing, may drop out from inside the lower end of the main shaft. To take the wedge off, you're going to stick a 3/16 Allen wrench up in the center, and you're going to use the 1/2 inch open end to hold the top of the crimper on the top of the mandrel shaft, which is right there. The 1/2 inch wrench will go just like that. Once you break the screw loose, you can remove the 1/2-inch wrench. The screw will come out, the wedge will come off. And the bearing you can just slide off. Put the wedge and the bearing off to the side. Now you're left with the bottom of the main shaft, and you can see the mandrel shaft is sticking out. Next, we're going to work with the top of the crimper. The top plate has 4 bolts. You're going to use your 5/16 Allen wrench, and you're going to break these bolts, all 4 of them, free. Screwing out the 4 bolts. Taking them completely out and putting them off to the side. Okay, now with these 4 bolts out, you could remove the top plate. It will just come off, slide it off. Your hose on your number 1 port, disconnect it, and on your number 2 port, disconnect it. Take the plate and just slide it off. When you slide the plate off, there's an O-ring that is in a groove. Be sure that O-ring is intact and stays inside the groove. Now you could take this plate and just put it off to the side. Next, pushing the mandrel shaft that is sticking out through the main shaft at the bottom where the head came off, push the mandrel shaft up, and you'll notice that the whole piston with the cylinder and the collar will lift up. Grab it and just pull it up, and just pull it all the way out. You may need to lower the crimper height to allow you to lift it all the way up. So I'm just cranking the crank handle, lowering the cylinder, the whole crimper down. It's a long shaft, so you may have to crank it down quite a bit until you can lift it out, just like that. Then you're left with this assembly and the whole shaft. And just take this and put it off to the side. You're now left with this lower plate. This is the second plate. The first plate we already took off, and now this is the second plate. This is the plate that actually has the inner pilot installed in it, but we have to get this plate off. There are 4 screws. There's one here, and there's 2 on the back side in the same place that need to be taken out. When they're removed, this guard will come loose. I previously removed the back screws. You may want to snug up the clamps so that the unit cannot move on you. At this point, you're going to want to find something that you could put inside the area right here when this gets lifted up. As you can see, when I lift this up, it creates a gap in here. You're going to want to take something and just put it in here. I'm using the end of my ratchet. You could use the end of an Allen wrench just to stick in here a little bit and let this come and sit down, sitting on it, because what I'm looking to expose is this hole right here. You can see you'll have the 4 threaded holes. Get that close up. There's 4 threaded holes right here that when the guard goes over the hole, you put the screw in. There's 4 like this that are threaded. And then there is one here that is not threaded. It is directly underneath the fitting. You're going to want to take a 1/8 Allen wrench into this hole. You'll feel for the set screw and just loosen it up. You do not have to take the set screw all the way out, just loosen it up. What that set screw does is it has a small plastic ball in front of it that when the set screw is tightened down, the set screw applies pressure to the plastic ball, which applies pressure to the threads, because this plate and this lower plate, this is the lower plate and this is the upper plate, are the 2 that are bolted together. But the lower plate is screwed on to the main shaft. We want to ensure that it stays screwed onto the main shaft, so we lock it down with a set screw. However, we don't want to lock the set screw directly onto the shaft, the threads of the shaft, so we use a nylon ball in between the end of the set screw and the actual threads. Now, with that loose, you're going to want to take your spanner wrench and put it on the bottom of the main shaft to break the shaft loose. There are 2 holes, one on each side of the main shaft. You can put your spanner wrench in one of them. And you may need a rubber mallet. Do not use a steel hammer. Use a rubber mallet to hit the spanner wrench on the end, on this end, to break it loose. Sometimes you could break it loose just by hitting it. And then once it comes loose, just continue to unscrew it. As it gets looser, you may then be able to grab it with your hand, grab the end of the shaft, and rotate it with your hand. It has a lot of threads, so be patient. Don't rush anything. Be sure all these steps are being done. Okay. Once you have that off and or unscrewed, you will then be able to go back to this plate and lift it off. It'll just lift off. Now when you lift it off, come straight up, because there's a what we call the non-rotating bar, this bar in the back, which is screwed into the bottom of the plate. But we did not remove that. There's no need to remove it. Just lift this all the way up and out. And then you're left with this assembly right here. At this point, you could unscrew the non-rotating bar easily out of the plate. And once it's out, just put it off to the side. At this point, this is what the top of the crimper is going to look like. These are the threads that we unscrewed the plate off of. This is your guard. Now, this may be a good time where you can easily lift this guard off, and you may want to just wipe and clean any dirt or anything, oils that may have accumulated on top of here. This one is pretty clean because it's a demo model, but yours may not look like this. So just wipe it all clean. Then go ahead and put your guard back on. When you slide the guard back on, there's a notch. There's a notch in the guard. You want to make sure this notch is facing up and it's to the left side when you're standing in front of the crimper. Just take the guard, set it back down gently. Don't force it over. There's a small screw on your sight bar. Right there. Don't force it over that screw, because if you do, you could jam it over the screw. Just lower it down till it just rests a little bit on the screw gently, and just let it sit there.